not be there for the world to see.
You just got that on recording.
Hey everyone. All right, so we did promise a live stream. We had a lot of internet issues.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get this done sooner than later. So we just put a recording together, and this will basically be the live stream conversation, just not live.
Yes. Sorry to all of our billions of fans who wanted to ask questions.
All 21 people. So we're really sorry about the live stream. We're going to try and put it together so we can do it again sometime, do another conversation. I think live streams are better with conversations. It's just unfortunately we're having a lot of internet issues, and this is the only space we can get to today. But enough about our issues here, because we can go on about that considering our budget for equipment, and which doesn't exist.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure we're actually in a deficit.
Shh.
Okay.
Anyways, welcome to the Call to Defend podcast / YouTube channel. This is, of course, Josh speaking, and I have with us Caleb Elliott. He's our newest member coming on. He actually has a project he's doing for us that's coming out later I guess technically in 2025, which is next year, depending on when you're watching this.
It is next year.
Yeah, but it's like in a few weeks or like a month or so.
The dad in me wants to say that I'll see you next year.
Okay.
So we're going to say next year.
But Caleb and I go way back. We grew up in grade school together. We were friends. We went to church for a while together. But I really say our friendship kind of restarted this past summer with me taking on this internship. And I was thinking about all the men in the church, and one of the people I wanted to be my accountability part was Caleb, because he's known me for so long that he knows that even if I said something and I tried to hide something, he'd be able to pick it up pretty quickly because he's seen that in me. And vice versa. So it's been a pretty good friendship, I would say. And the last time we ever did a podcast together was the LED podcast, which unfortunately still exists.
Oh, good.
I can't take it down.
Oh, that's wonderful news.
Because I can't find the password for the stuff. So if you look for it, you're going to hear a really awful podcast.
Yeah, no, it was not good.
If you're going to listen to one, listen to the first one. It's
and
called Moo.
Disregard the rest.
Disregard the rest. The first one is the only funny one because it's clearly us not knowing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. But it has probably my favorite intro we've ever done, which was Andrew took this cow mooing sound, and then he set it up, and you had to respond or something to it. You had to rap a beat over it or something.
Something like that.
And he said, you can't rap, it's just one moo, and then it's just the cow mooing, and then it goes into our intro song, which was something.
It was quite the podcast, yeah. But more to today's topic.
Yeah.
Is Christmas Pagan, Josh?
It's Christmas Pagan. This was a topic that I thought about doing and then decided against, because when I thought about it, it was the weekend before Christmas. I was like, there's no time to study, no time to do all this stuff. Caleb out of nowhere texts me and it's like, hey, let's do this. And I was like, all right, so God's saying you're doing this. Do it. Even if it impacts one person, that has always been our thing. Even if one person watches this and it helps them in some way, then we've done our job. Mm-hmm. So hopefully there's at least one person out there who's really going to benefit from this conversation. But Caleb, why this conversation? What about this kind of intrigued you to dive into it?
Well, so I'm going to try and be as kind and charitable as possible. A lot of neckbeards use this argument. Right? These are like your Reddit tier atheist arguments against Christianity, and in some way, somehow they believe that, even if they can find some semblance of a pagan tradition in our modern celebration of Christmas, that somehow negates the virgin birth of the incarnate God.
The other issues, I've been thinking about this too. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians have bought into these or have developed these theories to try and attack many of our holidays that we celebrate here in the United States, Christmas being one of them. And there's an argument that is made in defense of it that I think that regardless of it, if Christmas has any pagan roots or not, is a fair argument that if Christianity did take things over, then it's for the glory of God.
Right.
However, the question is that what happened?
So it depends on really kind of the tradition you're talking about.
Yes.
Right? For example, the famous one that a lot of people like to point out is Christmas trees. We don't have a concrete, no matter what anybody tries to tell you, they're going to say, no, it came from here, it came from here. We don't have a concrete definition, or not definition, we don't have a concrete origin for the Christmas tree, regardless of what anybody says. There's legends about Saint Bonaventure, that there were pagans worshiping, evergreen trees, and he went down and cut one down and put the star on top of it to show that Christ is even Lord over the pagans. Then you have the one with Martin Luther where he's walking through the forest and he sees the stars at the tops of the evergreens, and it reminds him of the incarnation. And so he chops it down and brings it into his house. And then there's, of course, the myths about the Germanic pagans and their worship of evergreens. And there's Norse pagans and their worship of evergreens. Good job, buddy. It's there's no concrete origin to that of the Christmas tree, even if you want to go with the Germanic pagans, let's say, right, and their worship of nature and the forest. I always like to point out, what do we put at the top of our Christmas trees? It's a star or an angel, right? The symbols of Christ's birth. So I do somewhat agree, in the very least in spirit, with the Saint Bonaventure. With, even if this is pagan, this one tradition, it's Christian now.
What's interesting too is actually, I was doing some scholarly research, looked at through different encyclopedias and books, and since this is now being recorded instead of live streamed, I'll put all the sources I could find down below. Some of them you're not going to be able to get access to because you need either a library card or you have to be a student to get access to the resources. So unfortunately, that means you have to pay for it, but just let you know that they're out there. And one I found a little more consensus on, and it's still not completely agreed upon, is that there were plays that used to be done. And in these plays, they would take these evergreen trees and decorate them. Right. They were to decorate and resemble the trees of the garden, as there were plays about Adam and Eve.
Yes.
And these were called paradise trees. And that's where some scholars theorize that you get the little bulbs that you put on because they represent the fruit. Yeah. And so, because if you think about it, they're evergreen, they don't really change. So it also has a symbolic message based on even just the nature of the tree itself. It doesn't change. It is always green, and that kind of brings this call back to the garden of what was lost, that nothing else changed, but humanity is what really brought this upon ourselves.
Right. And so, yeah, I've heard that perspective as well. That is the paradise trees from the plays. And that kind of launches us into why celebrate at that time, right? Why have those plays at that time? And you'll hear a lot about actually something I want to discuss before we move into that topic. Sure. Of dates and chronology. I want to quickly bring up something that I think it was Mike Winger where I first heard it, where he pointed out, at what point does the tree become pagan? Right? Is it when it gets cut down and brought into the house? Is it when it's decorated? Is it when, at what point does something go from belonging to the Lord to becoming pagan?
Yeah.
And his point was, it always belongs to the Lord. And I think there's something to be said there. Christ is Lord over all, regardless of what human action is. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus is Lord. And that applies to every aspect of life, including our traditions and our holidays and our celebrations and our worship.
Yeah. It's one of those things where, like you said with the Mike Winger quote, at what point does it become pagan? And then to really think about it too, we'll get into this more a little bit later, not to spend too much time on the tree issue, but when a lot of scholars, they found that there are, as Wes Huff put it, and he's a historian scholar as well, but he does a lot of YouTube work, so people don't always think that he's a scholar until he starts speaking, and they're like, oh, shoot, he is. But he points out that there's a lot of parallels, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Even if there are pagan roots, it's paralleled, but it's not necessarily corresponded with.
Right.
And if we were to therefore take every parallel between our religion and other religions, well, then we need to cut out singing, praying, scripture. We have to undo pretty much everything in Christianity, minus the resurrection, thankfully, which you're about to do a video on that.
Yes. Yep, that'll be the project coming out in 2025, that Jesus is unique in his resurrection.
Yes. And the point is that if we were to really cut everything out that is pagan or has any pagan resemblance, we would be left with pretty much almost no worship practices at all. But even then, scholars have shown that there might be some parallels, but there's no grounds for saying this is directly a pagan tradition that we're pulling from.
Right.
And some people will quote the Jeremiah passage that so many people love to. Have you heard that one?
Yes, that you shall not cut down a tree and decorate it.
Yes. If anyone quotes, I believe it's Jeremiah 10, right?
Yes.
If anyone quotes the Jeremiah 10 passage to you, understand context. That is about making and crafting idols.
Yep.
They are talking about not just taking down a tree, but they're carving them. They're making them have legs and arms and faces.
Which God even goes on to say later in the passage.
Yes.
So it's not anything to do with a Christmas tree.
There's many times where in church debates where there's some legitimate arguments based on the context. And there's sometimes where you have so many arguments that are made either for the church or against church or within the church, whatever it is, that takes things out of context. And if you read one sentence later, you would get a whole new understanding, like, wow, this argument doesn't work.
Yeah.
Jeremiah being one of those passages. So if anyone quotes Jeremiah, please, oh please, tell them to read a few sentences more.
But so yes, why do they celebrate those?
Well, before we get into
plays?
the why, the 25th, let's start with the very fact. Okay, we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. What are some of the
or January 6th if you're Orthodox?
Sure, but what are some of the arguments against why we should be doing this on December 25th? Instead of getting to before we get into the why we do, what is it people say about December 25th?
So, yeah, sure. So, a question I was actually asked very recent, or I guess I somewhat asked in kind, right? I encountered an atheist who said that, we shouldn't celebrate Christmas on December 25th because Jesus wasn't born on December 25th. And I had to respond then, okay, so what day should we celebrate Jesus' birth? And in effect, I'm asking him, what day was Jesus born? Right? Because if you're going to affirm the historical Jesus, which I think at this point you almost have to.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jesus mythicists. If you're going to affirm that Jesus was a real historical person, obviously there was a day when he was born.
Yeah.
If you want to claim that we have to celebrate on that day, you're going to have to tell me when he was born. And we can kind of look at passages like Luke 2 where the shepherds have the flocks out in the fields. That suggests late summer, early fall, somewhere around there. That doesn't narrow down a day, though. It narrows down a time frame. And if you want to move Christmas to August, you can start that petition. I don't think you'll get many signatures, though.
Right.
So that objection doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. It's and we'll get into why we just continue the tradition of December 25th later when we talk about why December 25th. There's three main pagan holidays that people like to associate with Christmas, being Sol Invictus, Saturnalia, and my personal favorite, Yule. The reason that Yule is my personal favorite, and we can just debunk this real quick.
Why don't you explain what Yule is?
Okay, so
and then
right. So Yule is the celebration of the winter solstice in the pagan cultures. So it's the celebration of, the changing of seasons and the death of the old, but still the vibrance of the culture. And that's where you get some people who will say Christmas trees come from the Norse pagans.
Probably because they also derive the idea of the Yule log coming from
Right.
Yule, because just the very name of Yule being in there.
Right. And in essence, yes, the Yule log would be a pagan tradition, right? They would burn logs in celebration, in commemoration, and as a sign of the old dying. So if you want to go ahead and say that, we shouldn't burn Yule logs because it's a pagan tradition, you can. I personally would 1 Corinthians 8 that thing and say, to each his own. If it's not going to lead you astray or lead anybody else astray, I don't care if you burn a piece of wood.
I mean, you have that fire.
Yeah, really. And again, that kind of goes back to at what point does it become pagan?
Right.
But so Yule is just the celebration of the winter solstice, really, is what it boils down to, and the change of season.
Mm-hmm.
And so it occurred around December 25th, not always on.
Right.
And it's kind of a window of time, right? It's a several day long celebration. One of those days was December 25th, but my personal favorite. The reason it's my personal favorite celebration, or at least the claim there is my personal favorite, is because so Christianity and Norse paganism meet in roughly the late 8th, early 9th century, which, if you'll notice, is 8 or 9 centuries after the foundation of Christianity, and thus the reason why Christmas is celebrated. Yule and Christmas have no similar origins whatsoever. Christianity celebrates Christmas about 600 to 700 years before it ever meets Yule.
Yeah, it didn't start immediately with like the first
Right.
apostles and stuff. It took a couple hundred years still to establish this
Mm-hmm.
idea of celebrating.
Well, and so some people might ask why that is, and the answer would be because the Christians were too busy running for their lives to sit down and all gather together and have nice big celebrations. You know, that's why, for those who don't know, the official canonization of Christmas as a Christian holiday, and not just something independently celebrated, was 336 AD. Which is 23 years after Christianity is legalized in the Roman Empire.
Right. And some people would then try to argue that the whole idea of the pagan idea of Christianity, not Christianity, but Christmas itself comes because Caesar made it and he's trying to combine all these things. But there's so much, we're not going to really talk about Caesar necessarily today, but
No.
But there's so many things that people blame him for as a ruler.
Constantine.
Sorry, Constantine. Yes, thank you.
I was a little confused. I was like, I mean, he's technically the title of Caesar would be passed down to him, but
the Constantine would, because of his influence, they argue so many things, and that's where we get the issue of like the Council of Nicaea, which we've done a video on this before of how even just reading the Nicene Creed, it kind of debunks the whole idea of what Nicaea was about, because that's the summary statement of their whole discussion. But okay, so that's Yule, which is pretty much kind of like thrown away.
Yeah.
How about let's do Sol Invictus, because that's probably the second most popular. Saturnalia is the most popular one I've heard. So let's save that one for last. So talk about Sol Invictus.
So Sol Invictus, a lot of people like to kind of play a little bit of word games here, because the direct translation of Sol Invictus is the unconquerable sun, or the unconquered sun. But so the word sol, S-O-L, does mean sun.
Right.
But it's S-U-N, not S-O-N. Regardless, people like to say, well, you know, that's just that's a clever double meaning in terms of how the word sounds. Forgetting that soul and forgetting that the words don't sound at all the same in Latin. But even so, you know, Jesus is called the bright and morning star, so people correlate those, and I can almost a little bit understand where they're coming from. The problem is, so the earliest mention that we have of Christmas as a canonized holiday is 336, as I mentioned. And that's around the same time we have Sol Invictus being mentioned for the first time. It's mid 4th century. I'm not really sure if it's the exact same document that mentions them both. But they're right around the same time. There's no really pre-established tradition of Sol Invictus being the impetus for Christmas, and we'll kind of get into more of that with the why we celebrate on December 25th, in terms of who I think completely debunks this argument is Hippolytus of Rome. We'll get into him a little bit and how he just kind of shatters this whole thing. But so Sol Invictus is also a celebration of you're gonna notice a lot of winter solstice celebrations. People kind of like to do that. The change of the season is a very big thing in a lot of cultures, especially in paganism, because it's all about the natural world. It's about worshiping what's created. Not quite to the degree of animism, right? They don't believe that everything has a spirit, but paganism believes that nature is very much alive and has a will of its own.
So what I'm hearing is that with Yule, the issue is time that when Yule takes place versus when Christmas takes place, there's not really a lot of overlap depending on the year. And even then, it's more about determining like seasons with some elements of pagan, but mostly it's about like seasons of time with winter and everything. Then you have Sol Invictus, which really doesn't come up until like around the same time as the decision to start celebrating Christmas. Like it really comes like a little bit after, I think right?
Right.
So it's not even deriving from pagan because it didn't exist yet. It was like a little bit of a...
We don't have any mention of it before that.
We don't know if it existed.
We don't know if it existed. It's likely that it existed. It's very likely that it existed because Sol Invictus is actually pretty widely celebrated in the Roman Empire.
Okay.
So it is likely that it existed a while ago, but it's not until... I don't want to confuse Saturnalia and Sol Invictus in my head. I believe it's 354.
Okay.
Is the first time that we get a mention of Sol Invictus as... I might be swapping that and Saturnalia in my head. But that's the first time that we get it mentioned as December 25th. It's likely that it was celebrated on that day beforehand, just because, again, it was so widely celebrated among the pagans in the Roman Empire.
Right.
And Christianity is, by the time that Constantine converts, Christianity is like 10% of the Roman Empire. So certainly not a small population, but certainly not wide enough to...
Yeah, no, there's a lot of misconceptions thinking that during the time of Constantine that it became like such a big religion that it took over like the entire thing. It's like, well, no, yes, he was swayed in that direction and there was still growing the church because they weren't being hunted down anymore. But they weren't like the majority.
Right.
They were very much still the minority of the religion and the people in general, that they weren't having as much of an influence on the government as people think they did.
Right. Yeah, no, and that's something that, we could go into that another time, but, the conversion of Constantine is not a convenient move for him. It's not, right? People like to say that it's this big unifying force, and this does somewhat tie into our discussion that he was just looking for some big unifying force for the empire. Christianity would not have been it.
No.
Right? That would be like the president of the United States converting to Islam to try and unify the country.
Yeah, it's definitely a religion that people think like people have a lot to gain from, because the unfortunate thing is we live in a culture where you have things like the prosperity gospel.
Right.
And in our culture there seems to be
which would have gotten you slapped by St. Nicholas in the 3rd century.
But there are some people who have
Excuse me.
taken so much of Christianity and be able to monetize it. And there's some elements where that's a good thing because it's helped fund so many things that we can do project-wise for different churches and for resources. And other usages, it has actually really brought a improper understanding of Christianity, and it's even a false picture that people then take that picture and look back onto history as if like, oh, this must have been how it always been. But it's like, no, the 12 dudes that, decided to follow Jesus, they did not gain anything of this earth.
Not of this earth.
And Paul being the best example of them, being the one who
gave up pretty
much everything to follow.
Pretty much everything, yeah.
Like there's
it's Philippians 4 that he talks about.
Something like that, yeah.
I think it's either 3 or 4. I'm pretty sure it's 4 where he's like, I was such a good Jew. Here's all the good Jew things I did. Yep. He's like, and now I count it all as loss.
Yeah,
it's all worthless to him now.
The dude had so much. He had power. He had money. He had he still had a great education afterwards, but he had even more access to things. I wouldn't say necessarily got like. Some people will argue one of the other motivators is sex and women. I don't think he got that even as a Pharisee.
I don't think so.
But the other things like the power and the money, he had access to, for the most part. And then he just in high respect because him as a Pharisee, like one of the highest Pharisees in respect. Because of his knowledge, all of it gone. And it wasn't even like a progressive, just change. It was just a immediate snap the fingers.
Radical.
Not even the same guy.
180.
180. Yeah. All right, so that's the two of the major three religions that people use against, or holidays, you could say, that come from religions, depending on which one you're talking about. But then you have probably the one that I've heard the most, and I've even heard it growing up within different churches I've been to. People have used this religion specifically as one against certain Christmas traditions, even if they're still using the argument we talked about before about what points become pagan, but still saying, well, because it comes from Saturnalia, therefore it means yada yada yada, and we have to be blah, 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 careful, or whatever. But Saturnalia, I mean, let's start with the first issue.
Mm-hmm.
The first issue is it starts on December 17th.
Yep, and ends on December 24th.
Depending on the year or
right.
the tradition that they're doing. Because
Right.
sometimes it takes 3 days, sometimes it take up to a week.
Yes.
Either way, it never ended on December 25th.
Not until mid-4th century, after Christians were already celebrating Christmas
Exactly.
on December 25th.
So let's just get the dating out of the way. Are there other reasons that we can understand the Saturnalia and Christmas does not have as many correlations?
I'm going to be honest with you, there's really not much in common with them. There's really not. Saturnalia is about as pagan as a festival comes. It's lawless. It's just filled with debauchery. It's got a lot of sex worship, a lot of animal sacrifice. The only thing in common, I guess, would be the current modern, somewhat ortho-Catholic tradition of feasting.
Okay.
That we have kind of adopted even in Protestant culture, of just stuffing food in our gobs. And then slipping mercilessly into a food coma. That would be very much in line with Saturnalia. They would just eat and eat and eat and have sex and then eat some more and probably have some more sex and then eat a little bit more.
Isn't this one of the holiday traditions that also involved the slave and the slave owner swapped places for a day?
Yes.
So it was really more a slap in the face to
the slaves.
slave. So yeah,
Yep.
like Christmas is all about the idea of celebrating the coming of the Messiah, who's born of the Virgin Mary, which that'd be a fun video to do someday, like talking about the virgin birth and all the scenes that come around it and the arguments against and for, and some of the different interpretations to come up with that.
We could get into Isaiah 7:14.
Isaiah 7:14, but some people, like you just said, there's no real correlation. You have one's about the birth of the king, as Christians and technically from Jewish tradition was hoping for,
and the other is just mass hedonism.
It's the exact opposite of like everything Christmas
would
represents.
make Marquis de Sade blush.
So really, the only thing that people come close to pulling from is dates, of which we haven't gone to why December 25th was chosen.
Right.
We just talked about the fact that it's on December 25th, and these other holidays didn't even take place on December 25th. Maybe they would cross over.
Sol Invictus would be the only one in my mind that you could make the argument that it lines up well in terms of dating with Christmas. Just because, again, it's likely that the tradition of it being on December 25th predates the official canonization.
Yeah.
But as we see later, it doesn't necessarily predate the celebration. We don't have amazing documentation on Sol Invictus. We have pretty good, but we don't have anywhere near what we have for Christianity.
Yeah.
Which, some people would say we're fortunate. I would say we're blessed. I think God definitely preserved that for us.
Yeah.
Perhaps even for things such as this.
Unfortunately, there are some things in church history where we have taken things and changed it to fit into our system. But
I would say that's a feature, not a bug.
Well, there's some that are a bug, I would argue.
Okay.
But that will get into more like denominational
Sure.
stuff that we're not going to discuss today. But I think me just saying that kind of gives the idea of what I'm talking about. That there are some traditions or beliefs of theology that have developed.
I thought you meant in relation to
not to
Christmas and paganism.
I'm not referring to Christmas. I'm talking about just church in general.
I got you.
In Christian history in general.
Okay, I got you.
So there are some things where we do have that. Christmas, though, and even this is in comparison to the research out there and the other videos that people have done, like Inspiring Philosophy, Wes Huff, Mike Winger, where this is just a small taste of the things that have come up within that. But why do we celebrate December 25th? I mean, that's the question a lot of people want to ask, because we already know that based on the dating of the Bible and the things that are shown in the scriptures based on when the shepherds are out and some of these other elements to it, that it couldn't have been December 25th. Is more likely, some people would argue, sometimes in the summer, like June, August, somewhere in that time frame. Some have argued March or April.
That is the summer, yes.
Yes, it is the summer. Most would argue it's towards the summertime. So then people tend to ask, why December 25th? And this is one that I recently discovered. So
it's kind of funny.
It is kind of funny. So let me just give this preface. In preparing to do this video, I was fully ready to have to do the whole defending of why it's okay that we have some things that came from pagan roots, like the tree, mistletoe, Yule logs, like the dessert we have, all these things. And then in my research, one by one, I found that not a single thing we have is pagan.
At least not concretely so.
Yeah, there's no concrete. My favorite one I found really funny was when people tried to say that Santa came from a pagan thing.
Yes. Is this Odin?
But let's get back to that. Let's save one for later. That was really fun to get into. But December 25th, this one really fascinated me. It is kind of funny, but I also find it really innocent and like
it is
and genuine. Like, wow, this is actually, if we didn't have the way of dating now, I think we would come to the same kind of conclusion.
A little bit, yeah.
Because let's be honest here, the ancient people, they weren't stupid.
No.
But they were using the resources they had and the understanding they had to predict certain things. And it's not that we got smarter, it's just that we live in a time where we have different resources where we can come to a more concrete on certain things. But in some other things, we've lost the nature of understanding. Like, there's some things we've lost that is beautiful to think about. Like, one of my favorite things I think about is the word ruach in Hebrew, and how they used to think of that as wind, not just as wind, but also as God's spirit moving. Now, of course, we know scientifically speaking that it's molecules and all these earth, but it's just this beautiful picture of how God moves about his creation. There's some things we have lost. This one is just really interesting, but I'll explain this one, but you'll explain why we still hold to this.
Sure.
Okay, so according to documents I found, and I even found some things in here, which I can pull up, but December 25th was eventually decided upon, partially because there was a belief in the church that holy people and prophets, and it depends on who you're researching, sometimes they'll say one or the other or both. They'll argue, they found that the church originally believed that those people would die on the same day they were conceived. So in this case, the belief would have been around March 25th was their current estimation of dating.
Yeah, and so much so that Hippolytus of Rome states it like as a fact.
Yeah.
He's like, because Jesus died on March 25th, he was born on December 25th. And
that was very much a heavy belief that the church had. Like, okay, holy people, prophets, they died on the day they were conceived. Okay, well then take 9 months after the conception, and what do you get? You get December 25th.
And that's the entire reason.
The entire reason we celebrate Christmas December 25th, and maybe we didn't all know this, but originally the whole reason for it was because they thought you were conceived on this day, the day you were died, if you were a prophet, which Jesus was, and he was extremely holy.
Yep.
So
he's God incarnate.
Yeah, so therefore, based on this understanding, 9 months later, he comes out December 25th. And it's, on one hand, it's like, we laugh at it. It's a little intuitive, especially when we're talking about God himself. Like, that's something that God could do if he wanted to. The question is this what actually happened? Well, no. As we know by other sources we have found, like we talked about before, like the shepherds being out. Well, they wouldn't have been out in December.
Right.
They would have been out during the summertime.
Yep.
Because of taking care of the sheep, weather, all these different elements to it. But no, they just genuinely thought like December 25th. He was conceived March 25th because he died March 25th. Therefore, December 25th.
Right. And some might look at that and say, okay, so why didn't they realize then, from Luke 2, that Jesus was not in fact born in December? And I think you have to realize that, just as we said, when you're running for your life, you're not going to be very organized.
There's the academics of Christianity didn't start until post-Constantine.
Right.
And even then,
because they had the legal ability to do so.
They had legal ability to do so. Now, there were some things that developed, like we had some council, like things that happened beforehand, like Council of Jerusalem. I mean, obviously those things happened before, but they were very much more concerned about gospel issues.
Right.
Like the person of Jesus, the how salvation works. Is it by works? Is it by keeping the law, or is it by faith alone? All these other little elements that they get into, they weren't concerned so much about when was he born. They weren't concerned about like the very things that we're concerned about as Christians today, that we debate so much over. Like, because
we have the luxury to do so.
We have the luxury to do so, and we have the resources we can do further research. Like, for instance, like Augustine didn't have access to Hebrew, so his understanding of why the Apocrypha was there was dependent just based on what he had.
Right.
And if we had the same resource at the time, we would come to the same conclusion.
Right.
But given that we have now access to other resources, we can be like, oh, okay, it's blah, 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 blah. It means this. December 25th, like, they were like, okay, done.
Right.
Like,
and again, this is not something that starts with the apostles. This is not something that, as Peter's being crucified upside down, he's not concerned. Guys, make sure you record his birthday as December 25th. Respectfully, this is a very minor issue in the early church of the exact date of Jesus' birth. They're more concerned with being decapitated.
And set on fire.
And set on fire, boiled in oil. It works.
Okay, so why do we still do it on December 25th? Why haven't we corrected the date on this?
Well, so it's a couple small answers that kind of add up to one big answer, and that one big answer is pretty much just tradition.
Sure.
As I said at the opener, what day should we celebrate it on? If not December 25th, can you name me the day? If not, then why change it? Right? You're going to change it to another day equally as inconsequential in the sense that it doesn't matter what day we celebrate. It's the fact that we are celebrating it.
Yeah, it's all about the reason we're celebrating is the fact that Jesus was born.
Mm-hmm.
And the way we have it timed out with it being a couple days before the new year, new beginnings, and then the way it's dated with
Right.
Easter. Like, there's reasons to keep it in place that it's symbolic more. And we're more concerned, I guess, with the question of why do we celebrate at all? Like, are we really just going to move a date to celebrate the very same thing that we're already celebrating now?
Right.
Especially when we know the fact that every argument that I've come across so far, I'm willing to bet there's other arguments out there. Every argument I've come across about why December 25th is a bad day to do it or is very pagan, just by doing a little bit of research, you find that it's not the case.
Right.
Now, one source I did use was Britannica because I find them to be relatively helpful. At times, in this area, they weren't the most helpful because they were providing some of the arguments that people had. And they provided some reasons why to trust and why not to trust.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really like going into who did they listen to and then looking at some of these other people we mentioned before, like Westhoff, who is a historical scholar, and the resources they have, and looking at all those, and then looking at the resources they cite, you tend to come across this other wealth of information that shows there's no reason to be worried about this. And even if we did be worried about it, like you say, at what point it's become pagan? Is just the very fact that it's done? Or is it, like, when does a tree become pagan? Is it...
Right. And when does a day become pagan?
Yeah.
As Scripture says, all days belong to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we take one day and consecrate it to remember the Lord's incarnation and birth does not mean that it's not true for the remainder of the days.
Yeah.
One could argue that we should be celebrating every day that the divine creator of the universe in his holy, holy, holy nature decided from eternity past, something he knew he was always going to do, to incarnate, to suffer as we suffer, and to die in our place, and to resurrect to give us new life. That's something we should celebrate daily.
Yeah.
Right? We should not only just celebrate that on December 25th. However, given that we as humans are simple and finite creatures, it's a lot easier to pick a day.
Yeah.
To specifically say, all right, this is the time that we remember the incarnation.
Right.
And everything that happened at that moment. It matters less that it's December 25th, right? It could have been May 16th. It could have been, February 2nd, whatever. It could have been Groundhog's Day. There you go. It matters more that we're celebrating it.
Yeah.
December 25th is solely the date because of tradition.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, 1,800 years later when we're having these conversations, we've got, just as I said, 1,800 years to say, okay, well, it's been this way for this long. What's the point in changing it?
Right.
And that might sound... It might sound a little dismissive, but that's because it is. We can dismiss this. It doesn't need to be something that we pour our energy and our thoughts into in all of our work, we can simply look at a claim that somebody makes, such as, Christmas is Saturnalia, and go, dude, for 100 years, they weren't even celebrated on the same day.
Right.
Right? Are Christmas and Hanukkah related because they're celebrated around the same time? No, of course not. They have nothing to do with one another. They just happen to be at the same time of year.
Right.
So focus more on what the incarnation means rather than the day that it's celebrated.
And with that said, like I said, there's a lot of churches even that will make some of the arguments that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is they'll be in support of the Saturnalia actually took place in the same day, or Sol Invictus, or Yule, or Yule logs, or Christmas trees.
Right.
And while we did say it doesn't ultimately matter,
Mm-hmm.
because there's two ways to go about it: one, the actual history, and two, who cares? And based, because at what point it's become pagan.
Right.
But also, check the resources. I mean, we're providing in the description YouTube links and encyclopedias and documents of people who've researched, and there they have more sources, and they keep referring to people they studied under, and they studied under, and they eventually go all the way back to these documents that are from these early centuries. Whereas some of these other ones, I can't begin to tell you how many of them I started going through, and there wasn't even a source list. Or I asked people, and they gave me a YouTube video or something that had no source list. Now, to be fair, Wes Huff in his video didn't put a source list, but he also cites the sources in the video. Like, he has slides in the video with the source and the page number and all those things. Inspiring Philosophy has his stuff in his description of, like, here's everything I read. Mm-hmm. And we're doing the same thing. We're going to be putting our stuff in there of, like, here's some quick things to check out, and therefore they have sources you can go check, and you can just trace all of them. Mm-hmm. But if your if the person you listen to doesn't even have a source, you might want to question. You have experience with this in your upcoming video.
Yeah,
which
to a degree, yes.
We'll say that for your video, but
yes,
be aware that just because someone said something,
it doesn't make it true.
Doesn't make it true, and that goes the same for us. So make sure that
be a Berean.
That's why we're providing our sources. So you can go check our sources, see if they say the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we misspoke and said something wrong, or maybe you can trace where they're going, and you eventually find that their rabbit trail ends and it's not good, or you find that theirs continues and it is good. We got to be open to actually fact checking each other instead of just being like, you must be right.
Exactly. What is it? The expression, by the third time you hear something, you believe it's true.
Yeah.
It's the classic example is that people on average swallow 8 spiders while they're sleeping in a year. Right. And so the first time you hear that, you go, that can't be right. That's not true. And the second time you hear that, you go, well, I've heard that someplace before. But I'm still a little skeptical. And by the third time you hear it, you go, I've actually heard about that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's very much the case with Saturnalia and Jesus, even Jesus mythicism at large.
Yeah.
You really get that movement in the 19th century of just people doubting that Jesus even existed. Which again, they don't have the resources that we have now where we can go back and look and say, okay, yeah, he definitely existed.
Oh yeah.
But the first time you hear somebody say, "Oh, Jesus is just Mithras," you go, "Oh, that can't be right." Jesus is a real historical person. And the second time you hear it, Jesus is Mithras. Okay, well, I've heard that before. I don't know if I believe it. Jesus is Mithras. I've heard about that recently. It's like people, and it's very much the same way with this. Christmas and Yule. Christmas comes from Yule.
Oh.
Well, that can't be right. We celebrated Christmas for how long? Well, there's the Yule log. Okay.
Even then, we treat Yule more like a dessert now.
Right.
Than and it's just a way to decorate it. Like, oh, it looks like a log.
Yep.
But it's not even really a thing people...
It's not even close to the Yule log itself, so...
All right, so... December 25th, I think we've covered some good reasons to why we can trust December 25th is good. We've covered briefly about trees. What are some of the other objections, whether they be like ones that you think are like common ones that you hear? They're like, okay, that's good. We should talk about. Or ones you're like, this is so silly that I really want to talk about it because it's just funny to talk about.
Well, I do love jolly old Saint Nicholas.
Saint Nicholas. Okay, why don't we start with this? Santa, often one of the other names we call him is Saint Nick.
Yep.
Why don't you explain what is the myth about him, and then what is the actual story of Saint Nicholas?
Sure. Well, so Santa Claus, as you mentioned, that's
it's not Scott Calvin, right?
Monikers. It is not Scott Calvin.
Did he fall off the roof?
I can't say for certain, but where we get Santa Claus is simply from German. It's just Sinterklaas, which is the German name for Saint Nicholas. So, sorry to all you Santa stands out there. It's still just Saint Nick, even if you try to go the other direction with it.
But what is the claim about Santa that makes it so pagan?
Sure. So some people claim that Santa is Odin, who is the
Anthony Hopkins.
Who is Anthony Hopkins, otherwise known as the Norse pagan god, god,
or the Marvel father,
or the Marvel All Father. Yes. But so there's the claim that he had this 8-legged horse, right, and that is somehow supposed to translate to Santa having 8 reindeer.
Because of 8 legs.
Because there's 8 legs.
1 reindeer per leg. Well, do you count Rudolph in that? Rudolph makes 9.
There's the real question. Barring any severely acneed reindeer, the claim is, since there's 8 reindeer and 8 legs on the horse, and Odin rode the horse through the skies, clearly that's the same thing as Santa Claus. I don't know if you can put 2 and 2 together, but it seems to be equaling 5 here.
Well, yeah. So that is the claim, because 8 legs, 8 reindeer.
Right.
We're
forgetting Rudolph. Let's get into the actual
and then we
story
talk
of
about
Santa Claus.
Yeah. So the actual story of Saint Nicholas, which some people around our generation, a little bit before, when they think about Santa origins, they might think like the movie like Santa Claus Comes to Town with like the little clay figures.
Yeah, good movie.
Yeah, it's a great movie. There's elements in there that do derive from the actual thing, but it's not the full story. Yeah. So what is the actual story of Saint Nicholas?
So
he was a real person.
Right. Yes, Saint Nicholas, otherwise known as the heretic haymaker, was a Turkish-born theologian in the late 2nd to early 3rd centuries. He very famously punched a heretic in the face at the Council of Nicaea, which, the council was to settle if there was a time when the sun was not. In other words, is Jesus God, and has he always been God?
Which we've done a video on the Council of Nicaea before.
Yes, so viewers will be familiar with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, not exactly. Let's just say he probably punched him in a good Christian loving way. So Saint Nicholas.
Well, it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking about the Anabaptists, they would say it was not the good loving way.
No, that's true. But we are not Anabaptists, nor cowards.
Let's get clear. Call to Defend does not take any particular stances on denominations. We are not non-denominational like the denomination, but we're not aligned with a very specific set of traditions.
I'm going to enjoy making you do legal disclaimers for these videos.
I'm telling you now, if this is your first video you're watching with Caleb, I'm telling you now that I gave Caleb, his freedom of speech. I told him there's only, I have no reason to distrust him. But I will say that if he takes any shots on traditions, it's because he's very confident in his.
That, and I just like to be a little confrontational.
I like to keep things, not necessarily past it, but if it's not important, I'm not going to get into it. If it's not a hill I'm going to die on, I'm not going to get into it.
Right.
Or it's just I don't want to.
And I don't actually believe that all Anabaptists are cowards, just most of them. Wow. So...
For those who don't know what Anabaptists are, Anabaptists, in summary for what we're talking about, they lean on, it's non-resistance, right?
Right, non-resistance.
Because they make it very clear it was either non-violence or non-resistance. They make it very clear it's one, not the other.
Right.
Because they said that logically one claims this other thing. Mm-hmm. But
But anyway, so Saint Nicholas.
Saint Nicholas punched a guy in the face.
Punches Arius in the face. And I think that's just the ultimate refutation of Arianism.
A punch to the face.
Straight up a punch to the face. I actually saw a great meme recently. It was a
Do I need
child.
to pull it up?
No. I can send it. I guess.
Just you can send it to me. I can pull it up on the screen.
It was a child sitting on Saint Nicholas's lap, and actually it was one of my friends that sent it to me. And he asks Santa Claus, "Was there a time when the sun was not?" And Santa responds with, "What?" And so then the child goes, "Oh, so you are not the real Saint Nicholas." And it is now my official headcanon that this child's confirmation was getting punched in the face by Santa Claus for asking that question.
Oh no! I mean, maybe I shouldn't pull this up.
It doesn't show him punching him in the face, but that's my official headcanon now.
Oh, that's your official headcanon?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I thought it'd be a little more chaotic than that. Because usually when you send me a meme, it's like, oh no, we're in trouble. All right. So, anyways, Saint Nick punched a guy in the face.
Yes. So Saint Nicholas punches a guy in the face.
And then, but that's not the full story of like where we get this idea of Santa Claus.
Right.
That's just one. That's just one of the things he's done.
Saint Nicholas, when he's not practicing amateur boxing, was the patron saint of widows, orphans, and prostitutes. So generally he was known quite.
While he's talking, I'm gonna pull this one up for you guys. I just found a meme. I'm gonna show it to you guys, but you keep telling him about.
So.
You're distracted now.
Yeah, I am. So he's generally known for taking care of those less fortunate. And there's a couple different legends surrounding him. One of the which is that he would put gifts and coins and money in the boots of children outside. And that's kind of where you get the idea of stockings from. Oh dear, you're pulling up top 10 memes of Saint Nicholas. But really, we get the idea of Christmas gifts from him, right? And the idea that you should be charitable around the holidays, you should give alms to the poor, because that's what he did.
Yeah.
Right? He was very much,
well, he
very
was
much
also
Christ-like in the sense that he cared for the least of these.
Even though he punched people in the face.
Which that's caring for the least of these too, if you really think about it. Because now the least of these won't be heretics. Lest they be punched in the face.
Okay, so I'm still getting the meme pulled up.
Yeah, I see that.
It's also because my screen is so small and it's so far away from me this time. So I'm just trying to do it. But here, I'll actually just send it to myself. But, okay, so the idea is Santa being this Odin with his 8-legged has no grounds for being the same thing as Santa.
No.
Especially because, one, the word Santa itself.
Yep.
And then you have the rest of the story of what he did, and that kind of spawned this other element of, which some people have actually argued that gift giving is pagan. It's like, well, if you're arguing that people weren't giving things to each other out of the love and desire, I don't know what to do with that one.
Yeah. Well, we can turn to some of the earliest passages in the Bible to show that they have absolutely nothing to do with one another. Even just Abel bringing an offering to God, right, has some semblance of a gift giving to it. You were trying really hard to get this meme up.
You can stop talking. By that I mean keep talking. Keep explaining the.
The gift giving. And of course, you'll hear similar claims about, pagans sang Christmas carols, which, firstly, no, they didn't. Most Christmas carols, in fact, some of the best Christmas carols are written by Jews, as funny as that is. But, there weren't any, 4th century BC pagans singing Deck the Halls. Yes, pagans sang. Every culture ever has sang. You don't get a claim. Thank you for putting it over my face. You can keep it there. I'd like to be associated with slapping heretics.
Oh my goodness, I keep clicking. There we go. This thing right here.
Uh, again, I would rather be associated with slapping heretics.
Isn't that a beautiful meme?
It really is. It's a good one.
It's saying right between us and Saint Nick. Sorry that took us so long. My eyes were not helping me.
And it was there for what, all of 5 seconds?
Well, it was on your
10
face
by
too.
the time you got it dragged over there.
Yeah, I kept moving us by accident. This is probably the most unprofessional video I'm about to release because there's me just.
Wait till mine.
Oh, I just mean production wise.
Yeah, no, I know. But yeah, so basically, it's gonna boil down to this. Any tradition that somebody claims is pagan, be a Berean. Go look it up. Follow the rabbit trail. It'll take you all of 5 minutes at most. And chances are they're wrong.
Be careful if you're going online, though, as we all know, because
Right.
you're going to find some sites that pop up based on foot traffic or wording, and that sometimes they're not always the most helpful. Sometimes they're misleading. So
I have found the best and easiest way in terms of this kind of research is to just type in, like, for example, the origin of mistletoe. Right, that's a very neutral stance. You'll get a few articles here and there that in all caps that say mistletoe is pagan. The origin of mistletoe is pagan, stuff like that. But so then you can read those articles, certainly, look at the claims they're making, and then find an article that says mistletoe is not pagan. Look at the claims they're making, see which one is more historically accurate.
yeah. So are there any other major, whether it be silly or serious, like accusations against Christmas that come to mind right now as ones like, hey, let's briefly mention this? Are those like the big ones? Like
those are the pretty big ones. The only other one would be virgin birth.
Virgin birth,
which Richard Carrier famously put virgin birth, it's pagan, guys, get over it. And then he goes through a whole bunch of deities in the ancient Near East that, like Horus, for example, he says was a virgin birth, which not even close to true. Right? I shouldn't say that. I don't recall if he put Horus on that list. He might not have. But a lot of people will say Horus was virgin born. Not even close to true. His birth story is a little messed up. I will grant them his father was not alive when his mother was impregnated. And you will hear more about that when I do my resurrection debunking video.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that we can? At this point, we've kind of agreed that you're coming on, but you're not going to be like necessarily as frequent as maybe like
Sure.
probably do my stuff because of the type of conversations you like to have and want to get into. But what are some of the things that we can expect, or that we are expecting you to be coming up with within the next year with our group?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, resurrection myth debunking will be the first video I put out in 2025. I have that script written up, as you know. You've read through it.
I have, yeah.
And I will make you regret allowing me on this channel. Yeah, so I will have the resurrection myth debunking video coming out in 2025. There's a couple of different video topics that I've looked at. I've kind of looked at a little bit of a study of Jonah. I know I talked to you about.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if I'm going to go forward with that one or not.
It was more like I think you were characterizing it as a theme from Jonah, like a theme study, not necessarily a theme within Jonah itself, necessarily the whole book.
Right.
And then we were talking about, I think Lamentations was one that.
Lamentations is another one. That one would be much more study-esque. Because that one, Lamentations, I've done a deep study on. Something that I really like about Lamentations, right, is that every chapter is broken down into the Hebrew alphabet. I just whacked the mic cord.
They probably heard that because these are very not expensive microphones.
I apologize for anybody who just lost an eardrum. So Lamentations is broken down. Each chapter is broken down in the Hebrew alphabet.
Yeah.
So
you don't need to recite it.
I wasn't going to. So what you can do is you can read them chapter by chapter, or you can read it across the chapters. Only chapters 1 through 4. Chapter 5 is not broken down into the alphabet. But you can read like all of the alepphs right in a row, and all of the baits, all of the gimels, and so forth and so forth. Yeah, I thought we weren't going to list it.
Well, I can't.
So I think that's a really cool structure that you can do. So I would probably do a video where I would just read through Lamentations pretty quickly, and then go through and discuss each letter. I would try to find a way to spice that up a little more, though, because Lamentations is a very depressing book. Like, you think country songs are sad. You ain't read Lamentations yet.
Yeah, Lamentations, there's also some repetitive elements to it, so it's it can be easy to get lost in the repetition.
Yeah.
But that's a really important element in Hebrew writing is repetition. A little bit still today, but maybe not as much. Sometimes if it's super repetitive, we find it to be like, oh, you're just filling the word gap. But for them, it was pretty important.
Jeremiah hitting that word count.
I would say Paul with,
Yeah.
what was it?
Yeah.
I think it was Romans, wasn't it? Like 6 or 7, wasn't it? Is it Romans? Or I do what I do not want to do, and these students all the ideas.
Yes. That's Romans 6. Yeah.
Yeah, the word count. Some people call
Is
it.
that 7? No, that is 7 because it's the discussion of it is not I who sin, but the sin who lives in me.
Yeah.
I do not do what I want to do, and do what I do not want to do.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so we're looking at possibly some Bible studies coming up.
Yep.
You have an apologetics video working on. Probably some other things are going to come up as well. I know that we have put the poll out for you guys to vote on, and we are doing 1st and 2nd Corinthians. 1st Corinthians starting in beginning of the year. 2nd Corinthians will be ending the year, so we're going to have a gap in between the two for a time to do everything else. Lamentations will filter through whenever those are done.
That would be a quick video. It's not gonna. I'm not gonna break down the Hebrew because your boy doesn't speak Hebrew, so I'm more of a Greek guy.
I'm trying to become the more Hebrew guy.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons why we work well is because we kind of bounced off of each other in those areas.
We just need an Aramaic guy.
Well, I think that's probably just going to be me too because
nerd.
Well, Hebrew and Aramaic are very similar to each other. They're sister languages, and
true.
So there's really no reason not to do one, not the other.
Because Aramaic is just some monstrous love child of Hebrew and Assyrian. So
descriptions are always really interesting. All right, yeah. So we'll be seeing you a little bit more coming on here. It's like your first video right before the end of the year, which wasn't one we were planning on doing. Then just kind of decided on it.
This was literally figured out in less than a week.
I've spent like a few days and hours just studying, preparing for this. But
you're welcome.
Also, just wanted to make sure that you got to share some things you found in those things, which was pretty cool. It's a cool conversation. Is Christmas pagan? I think we can outright say no.
No,
there are no pagan roots. If people say that it is, ask them for their sources and then check the sources of the sources, because your source list should eventually come down to the original documents or traditions or something that points to that. If you find that it stops any time between 1800 and today, I would argue it's probably made up.
Especially if it stops in the 1800s. The 1800s was a big time for mythicism.
Yeah.
Most of which has been completely debunked by today.
Now, of course, you're talking about things that are relatively recent in history, like,
sure,
I don't know, let's say like the Reformation and forward. And of course, it's going to stop early. But if you're talking about things that are like ancient Near East, first through like the 5th century, Constantine, all those things.
Basically the early church period and earlier.
Yes. Those things should be checked with resources.
Right.
Because any claims that are just being made out there without evidence for it can be problematic and cause a lot of confusion within the church. I personally take the stance that while I might have some arguments against others, I'm always also trying to be listening and letting them convince me. And if their argument is not convincing, then it's no longer a good argument to consider. Doesn't matter if I have presuppositions or whatever. If the argument is not logical and then the context used for it does not back it up, it's not good. So, with that, I think that's probably a good place to cap off the year before we begin 1 Corinthians. That's
Have fun with that.
You can join in on that one. It doesn't have to just be me. You want to do the head garment passage?
Oh, dude, I would love to tell women that they have to have their heads covered in church.
That's gonna be a long video probably.
Well, what was it? Mike Winger just put out.
Mike Winger did a whole women's
compilation.
Ministry. Wow, have you seen all those videos?
I don't have 11 hours.
Yeah, so that was one video. First
Yep.
Timothy, 11-hour video. I had on double speed, and it took me so long to get through.
Yeah, it would be
great.
5.5.
Yeah, and the head cover
math.
was also a long one.
Yeah, no. So I can take the head covering passage if you would like.
You can hop on to 1 Corinthians. We can talk about that not on video.
Yeah, fair enough.
With that said, we thank you for being with us this year. I know this last month we kind of took a little bit of a halt on things, just mostly because we were trying to prepare for everything coming up in this next year, and we want to get feedback on what people were hoping for. One of the things we were requested to do was more apologetics regarding salvation, which would therefore include soteriology, the crucifixion, virgin birth, pretty much everything that covers Jesus. We've been requested to get a little bit more on those. So
he is kind of important.
Yeah, he is kind of important. And really, that's a topic where even if I'm talking with an atheist, you can talk about creation and all the logic for it back and forth all day long. But the thing that I always think we should boil down to is if Jesus didn't raise, that's the most important thing. Because if Jesus rose, then it doesn't matter what the other arguments are that you have. Because if Jesus rose and he's God, then clearly there's a God to the universe. If he didn't raise, then we should discuss.
Our faith is worthless.
Yeah, our faith is worthless, and then we should discuss, does God exist or not? Which logically, yes.
I think not to be Catholic, but to be a little Catholic. One can know that God exists with certainty simply from observation of the universe. I think that's true.
Oh, that's not necessarily Catholic. That's a lot of people who.
Right, but it's I believe it's Aquinas.
Aquinas is pretty much a guy you need to know in the apologetics world.
That's true.
No matter where your denomination is, that's an important name to know because he does so much of the natural world apologetics that.
Yeah.
Like you got your Hugh Rosses, your Answers in Genesis, your Discovery Institutes.
Yes. I'm just gonna
leave it at that.
I was gonna keep my Ken Ham thoughts to myself.
Oh, Caleb. All right. Well, thank you guys. I have no idea how long this video is. I have to get this up. I'll get this up as soon as possible. Just with everything, there might not be our intro music, just because I need to process it faster. Because, this is supposed to be a live stream. We're sorry it didn't work out. Hopefully, we'll do another one soon. I would love to do more discussion videos in 2025.
Yeah.
Whether they be over the internet or they would be in person. So whether it be you and I, Josiah and I, if we can get him back, he's talking about coming back for a video. Maybe we can get some pastors and
sure,
other people.
Yeah.
So we look forward to seeing you guys in 2025 with 1 Corinthians. It's gonna be a long trip. I guarantee you, it will not be 16 weeks. It will be longer than that.
Do it all in one video. Just.
Oh no.
Commit.
No. Hopefully this is helpful to someone on the question of Christmas. Maybe we'll do another one of these later on Christmas, or maybe we'll just do the Virgin Birth next year. But
could do the Virgin Birth. Could also do Easter because there is.
For Christmas.
Right.
Christmas
specific. Yeah. I was gonna say because there are quite a few claims of that Easter is pagan out
maybe
there.
We should do that one in April, or is it in March this year? How early is it?
It is on my daughter's birthday, so it is in April.
Oh yeah, Caleb's a father, by the way.
Yes. I know I exude raw masculine energy, so you presumed that I was a father anyways.
All right, thanks guys. We'll see you in the next video.
Lord willing.
In 2025.